Okay, well, I'd like to welcome you all to the final session of Counterforum. This is Counterforum's question time, and I'm Claire Solomon. We have a number of people on the panel today who are going to be addressing questions around the crisis and the resistance, and we're going to take a few questions that have already been written in advance, and then we're going to open it up for freestyling questions. One of our speakers, Joshua Asani, who's been centrally involved in the Occupy LSX at St Paul's, has just sent us a text. He apologises, he's been kettled down at Parliament, so that's not good news, but we are trying to get hold of him and see if we can do a telephone link-up with him at some point in the afternoon, so that will make it even more interesting and experimental, I suppose. So let me just introduce the panel before we start. On my far left here we have Alex Kenny from the NUT. We have Ellie Badcock, who's a student, well, actually not now. She was a student here at SOAS, and she's also an activist with Counterfire. We have Faizi Ismail, who is a student here at SOAS, doing a PhD. And we have, on the other side, we have Chris Banbury, who's our guest from the International Socialists of Scotland. So I'd like to welcome the panel. Thank you very much for coming. We are going to open up with the first question from Leo Goretti, and unfortunately we don't have a roving mic, so if Leo could come to the microphone and ask his question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. My question is, basically, it seems to me that since 2008, the environmental question has been a bit sidestepped, both in the media and in the movement. But actually, according to the last reports, the climate change is going on at an even quicker rate than in the worst estimates. So my question is, how should a 21st century socialist movement address this issue?
Thank you, Leo. I'm going to ask Chris Banbury to answer this question.
Well, actually in Scotland, the aim is to get 80% of Scotland's energy be produced by renewables within the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament, which I have to give Alex Salmond some credit for. However, I'm dubious whether Salmond will deliver on the promise, because also he's going to have to cut back in expenditure. But it's obvious, if you look at Scotland, it's ideal to have a renewable electricity. It's really for wind, for tidal, for everything. And that is also true right across the United Kingdom. But you're right, one of the things that was almost immediately cut back on was this, and you should remember the occupation in the Isle of Wight. The Britons had then only one wind time factory which was shut down, you know. It's fairly incredible. And we're seeing a whole series of other things going on. Locally, I know in West London, that for instance the Crossrail project, which I think generally we should be interested in railways, but I'm not sure about cutting travel to Birmingham by 15 minutes or something is the key thing. But it involves quite a lot of serious environmental degradation. They're demolishing a furniture co-op in order to build an electrical sub-station. While across the road there is one of those disgusting huge advertising towers looking onto the Westway. Now the amount of electricity that alone must generate, that would be my prime target for doing so. So I think we have to return to the battle over this. I think we have to put it back into the idea of creating jobs. Right? And I think the pamphlet that's been produced about producing jobs, which a number of trade unions have been involved in writing and producing, is quite a good blueprint for that. And I think we have to talk about this, because we shouldn't just let the environmental issue slip off the agenda. And I have to say, finally, in terms of Italy, I think there are a number of real issues we should be taking up. And while Italy is a major producer of organic food, the second biggest, the environmental destruction by the government and by organised crime is unbelievable. For my sins, I holidayed in a place called Mondragone in Campania, which is the centre of where the Camorra are dumping toxic waste. Right? And the Italian government have done nothing about that. Right? There are serious issues. I mean, the Berlusconi, I doubt, will be very worried about that now. He's got other issues on his mind, probably Bonga Bunga, but let alone what's going on in the world. But I think these are issues we need to take up.
I believe Ellie Badcock would like to come in. I'm not sure if this microphone's working.
Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Wonderful. Yeah, I absolutely agree with Chris. I think it's very much a case of bringing demands around climate change into a broader social movement. And actually, I mean, obviously being an ex-SOAS student, you get to talk to people who have sort of come from all over the world. And I was speaking to somebody yesterday who was actually in Japan when the earthquake happened and the kind of nuclear meltdown started happening. The really interesting thing about that was she said that actually that kind of environmental disaster brought up all these issues around social change that people hadn't discussed for decades. Actually, it was bringing up questions of, you know, why has our money not been spent on building, you know, either better defences for this kind of stuff or actually investing in renewable energy. It didn't just bring up questions of renewable energy and climate change, but it brought up, you know, a whole series of questions about what governments spend their money on, whether that's justified, and this kind of thing. So I think it's really important that we're doing just that and bringing those questions into a wide movement, as opposed to trying to separate movements and to start a climate change movement, you know, as a kind of standalone thing, especially in a climate like now, basically.
Just to add to, I agree with what Chris and Ali have said, but I think we should say that I don't pretend to know everything about climate change and the environmental crisis, but it seems to me it is part of the crisis of capitalism, and that capitalism won't be able to solve these environmental questions because it's not really interested in solving them. But the one thing I think that will come to the fore in the debate is this question about population, and I think we have to be really careful about this. You know, the reports that the 7 billion, I think we are now at 7 billion, and you get this drip in the media that the planet, we can't sustain this population, you know, the population boom. And I think, you know, as socialists, we have to say we can. There are enough resources in the world to feed and house and you know, to meet all these people's needs, but capitalism isn't capable of doing it. And I think that will have to be part of the it is part of the environmental question. I think that how the world's resources are shared out and how they're used to meet the needs of peoples. And I think that will become a really sharp debate. You know, you can see it happening in the media already. You know, what are we going to do? You know, do we have to bring in, you know, limits on how many children people can have and all that kind of thing? And I think we have to have a response to that as well.
Thank you. That's our first question. Our second question was from Carol Vincent. Would Carol please come to the microphone?
Carol can't ask a question.
Do write down questions even as we're speaking if you want to submit something. Great.
It was too long, so I had to shorten it. Where is it? Have you got it? Rose? It's something, I mean, the funny thing is, it's related probably to environment in a way. With our fuel prices going through the roof and announcement that the energy companies have got profits going through the roof, and with just a little slap on the hands from our government ministers and not much else, what are we going to do as a movement when people start dying because they have to choose whether to eat or heat? Because that will be the question this winter. If we had a winter like last year, I didn't have any heating on in my house last year because I couldn't afford it, and my electricity cost has gone up from £15 a month to they want 70 quid out of me. Well, that's more than 1 week's benefit for me. So you know, it's going to be food prices are going up, everything's going up. What do people do? You know, and what are we going to do in response to it as a movement?
I mean, I think we're going to have to step up the movement really against the carts. I mean, we have to get this information out there. I mean, you know, it's an absolute scandal. It's criminal that people have to choose between heating their house and eating. I mean, this is not even in, you know, a developed country like Britain. This obviously, you know, should not be happening. So I think we have to put these kinds of issues at the centre of, you know, the whole anti-caste movement, and I think most decent people in society, you know, would agree that that is absolutely unacceptable. And just in terms of the environmental movement in general, I think, you know, we need to politicise it. I would wholeheartedly agree with what Alex said, is that, you know, you can't resolve these problems within this system. So any, you know, any movement, any kind of climate change justice movement, or we have to look at it in terms of challenging the whole system, challenging the system that actually breeds this. I mean, climate change at the end of the day is an economic issue, and and I think that's the way we have to. So we have to put politics into all of these demands that we're making.
Britain is the most corporate country in Western Europe. It is also one of the most expensive countries in Western Europe, and the two go hand in hand. The fact that 4 supermarket chains sell 75% of food in this country means there is a cartel controlling food. It is expensive. I wouldn't hold up France or Germany or anyone else as a model. We just walk into a French hypermarket and the quality and price is obviously better. And the expense goes on. How much you pay for a cup of coffee in a high street chain owned by a corporation, the lack of choice of bookshops, the lack of choice of cinema actually. The choice of film available in London is now worse than it was 30 years ago and there are actually more cinema screens, but they're dominated by corporations. So even Ken Loach cannot guarantee his films go on distribution. These are issues I think we have to take up and bring out, and I do think we need to think about some forms of direct action. I think it's really interesting that in Greece, when they suggested that taxes on should be collected in with the electricity bill, people occupied the offices of the electricity boards to stop them collecting the money in. That was direct action. And I think we have to think about how we get into the movements like the 30th, targeting these people, like we did actually around the City of London, around the bankers and the bonuses. We need to bring this in. People elsewhere in Europe wouldn't accept what's going on here, and I think we have to accept it. This winter, pensioners will die because of lack of heating. It happens every year. It is a scandal. We are the 5th richest, 6th richest country in the world, despite everything, and yet people are going to die because they cannot afford heat. This is something we should be taking up and injecting into the movement, but also putting the case for direct action in here. And one thing I want to say is, just to conclude on that, when we talk about things like food and choice, we are the ones who want choice. It is capitalism which denies us choice. I would like to have a decent cup of espresso. I cannot get it from these people because Starbucks isn't disgusting. I would like to have, decent food. I want choice. I do not get it from these people, and it is capitalism doing it. Every morning or evening I come home, there's a pile of leaflets for takeaway pizzas stuck in my front in the hallway. No Italian would eat that shit. Right? It is not choice. We're being forced to consume rubbish by corporate Britain, and we should be up in arms about it.
Okay, I'd like to invite Amber Holmes to the microphone now. She has a question, please. Or you can shout from there if you've got the...
It's directed mainly at Alex, but obviously if the other panel members want to chip in. Should the unions be doing more to relate to the broader anti-cuts movement, especially sort of in relation to sort of November 30th coming up?
Yes.
Discuss.
Yeah. If I say a little bit about November the 30th and what we're involved in, clearly what the trade unions are involved in, and some of us who are active in the NUT have looked at the issue of pensions as the one which we thought would unite most unions, and that is now clearly coming to fruition. So the prospect of 3 million trade unionists, public sector workers on strike on November the 30th is now very real. But I think what we have to do, although we have to keep our eye on the pensions issue, and legally we have to say this dispute is about pensions and so on and so forth, I think it's absolutely clear that this whole issue is about the government's austerity measures. It's about taxing workers, making us pay more, working us work longer to get them out of the crisis that they've created. So we do want to have an orientation. We have to have an orientation to the wider anti-cuts movement. I thought March the 26th, the demonstration on March the 26th, showed the potential, within the trade union movement to address these wider issues, these wider cuts issues, to defend local communities, to defend, all those areas that are being cut. But there is so much more trade unions can do, and I think that's starting to happen. I think in some of the bigger unions you're seeing an orientation to the occupation at St Paul's and the student movement and all those kinds of things going on. There's a long road to travel, and we know that the battle isn't over. But I think the unions have to, whilst looking at their own issues and looking to defend their own their members' interests, they have to put it in the context of what's happening, because we know we are not going to win this battle on pensions unless we defeat the government's economic policy. You know, the tax they want to make on us is about a key plank of their economic policy. So we can't win it alone. We can't win it just on the issue of pensions. So we want everybody to come and support us on November the 30th, and I think that will continue that drive towards widening the campaign.
Thank you. While we're talking about that, Alex, would you be able to tell me a little bit more about what the National Union of Teachers have been doing in their sort of localities? What sort of events and what sort of arguments have been coming up, perhaps?
Well, the NUT isn't balloting at the moment, because our ballot for the action in June was for discontinuous action. So we've called the action on November 30th. We're now waiting for those unions who have got to have ballots to produce their results. We've got 2 unions, Unison 78% vote in favour of action this week, and the EIS in Scotland 82% vote in favour of action, and more unions now bringing in their ballot results. So what we've been doing in our local area is working hard to support Unison and the GMB and Unite, those unions who've got members and support staff in schools, to encourage them to vote in the ballot, to encourage them to come out. So we're organising action committee meetings with those unions to try and address, as many workers as we can, to try and get the message out. The questions that are coming up is, can we win it? Will strike action achieve anything? And the obvious answer to that is we don't know yet. We don't know whether we can win anything, but I don't know if people saw this week that the government did start to make or offer some concessions. They did start to come forward with something that was different to what they were originally proposing. And I think that enables us to go to people and say, this wouldn't have happened if we didn't take strike action in June. This wouldn't have happened but for all the campaigning that we're doing. So they're showing a sign of weakness. Now is the time to keep the pressure on. Now is the time to get those ballots out. Now is the time to build the action and make relations with the wider cuts movement. The big issue we're going to face is the public sector, private sector divide, because the government and all their leaders will say private sector pensions are no good, public sector pensions are good, and their answer is to worsen our pensions. That will not benefit one private sector worker. Not one private sector worker will get anything out of the worsening of our pensions. So the government is shedding crocodile tears for private sector workers, because they've allowed companies to take pensions holidays, they've allowed companies to close down their schemes. So one of the arguments we're trying to get out on the day is that we want pensions justice for all. We want a decent state pension for people in retirement, because it's not enough, as Chris has already indicated, and we want decent pensions in the private sector. Now, that's going to be a hard argument to win, but we're trying to steel our members to do it, and we think we can win it in the public on the day, with big shows of strength, that obviously for the demonstrations that are going to take place.
Ellie would also like to add something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm saying with Alex, because I'm working in the private sector, never see a pension, I don't have any sort of pension plan or sick pay or anything like that, and you're absolutely right, it's the kind of thing where people will try and drive a wedge between two different sections of workers, and I think that's absolutely disgusting. But I think that November 30th is actually going to be, it will be huge in terms of that, and I think that by working with the broader anti-cuts movement, actually we'll be able to bring a lot of those workers out who may never have a pension, but are actually incredibly political. I mean, the office, the call centre that I work in, it's been nigh impossible to start a union essentially, but we are doing slowly but surely. But people are incredibly politicised, and all have heard of Coalition of Resistance and Stop the War Coalition, and come out on demonstrations, and will easily get involved with these kind of things. So actually, I think that the work that unions like my union, Unite, are doing with Coalition of Resistance, by broadening their membership out to students and unemployed people, is actually going to make all the difference. And it's the start, I think, of building that solidarity between public and private sector workers, in the face of attempts to kind of split us apart. And I think it's absolutely incredibly important. And I think in terms of November the 30th, the Coalition of Resistance kind of slogan for the day is wonderful. It's what's going to actually drag a lot of people out. It's to make it a festival of resistance. So obviously, as Alex says, the focus for a lot of unions does have to be around pensions, but it's the job of everyone else that isn't affected in that way to come along the day and to broaden it out in that way. And absolutely, I think it is totally right what the unions are doing in that way, and I hope we'll see more of it.
I'm just going to chip in something else, which is on the 1st of October when the Scottish Trade Union Congress had a major demonstration, 20,000 people in Glasgow. The Coalition of Resistance was involved in organising a student freedom march, which was a big success to that demonstration and formed the basis of a very successful core contingent on that demonstration. And on the 30th, that same thing is going to happen in Glasgow again. There will be a student freedom march coming in to join the major demonstration in the centre of Glasgow. On the 1st of October, that would be also preceded by an occupation at Strathclyde University. I think there's a good chance there'll be occupations. There have already been a number of occupations in Scottish colleges. Interestingly, the occupations are in support of English and overseas students who are charged fees when Scottish students don't. So, going against the stereotype of Scots, actually, here are Scottish students occupying in support of their English counterparts. And may I just say something else, just to throw it in? I don't know if people know, the president of Glasgow University Students' Union, the equivalent office, was forced to resign this week because of a core campaign when it was revealed he'd come out in favour of student fees. The core group on Glasgow University campus took up a campaign to get him out and forced his resignation. And that was a good way to go. I would like to see student freedom marches, student contingents, student occupations all around the 30th. I know there's the other demonstration going on, but I think it's really important that students are also part of that whole day of action.
Can I just,
yeah,
sorry, just add one thing that I think is important, that although we are defending a public sector pension, which we've fought for and we've defended in the past, but I think it throws up really fundamental questions about pensions and about what provision we make for people in their old in their old age. As Chris has said, people are dying because they can't heat because their pension isn't enough. But if you look at what's happening now, youth unemployment going through the roof at the same time as the government's telling people they've got to work longer and longer and longer. Well, if people are working longer and longer, where are the youth going to come in and get their jobs? If I've got to work till I'm 68, where's the young person who's just graduated going to get their job that I've got to work for I've got to keep for another 8 years than I would normally? So I think there are questions now being, the whole pensions thing does throw up about what provision you make, about employment prospects for young people. Unemployment amongst young graduate teachers is now higher than at any time for the last 20 years. That's partly because the number of jobs is being cut, but also because people are being asked to work longer. So, there's all kinds of spin-offs from this discussion. Pension participation in pension schemes is lower now than any time since the 1950s, because people are coming out of their own pension schemes because they're looking to pay heating bills, or they're looking to make ends meet. So there's a spin-off from our particular focus that I think does get you to ask all kinds of questions, or does enable you to ask all kinds of questions to other groups of people who may not be inside what we're trying to do.
Yeah, just a quick thing on the occupations. I mean, I fully agree. I think we should have occupations in the run-up to the 30th, and I think that's one of the, the sort of, it's a great way to show, it's a very, deep way to show solidarity with those out on strike on the 30th. And I think if we can raise it in every university across the country, I mean, I think that is the strength of it. The fact that it's happening, that what happened last year, one of the strengths of it was that it was happening in so many different universities, and if so there has to be a sort of a level of coordination around it if we are to pull it off in an even stronger way than last year. And just on coalition resistance, I think one of its real strengths is its outward looking. It was one of the first national anti-cuts campaigns that had a conference around the European crisis and what's happening in the rest of Europe. And I think that is a real strength because, obviously we can't just look at what's happening in this country. We've got to look at what's happening in Greece and Portugal and Ireland and Spain and elsewhere. And because, it is all linked. So I think, one of the questions that was raised in the session on universities was that well, you know, is really having occupations at a local level really that effective? And I think, you know, I think we need both. I think we need occupations at a local level, and we need national mass action. And it's that combination that is really going to fight austerity and hopefully get this government to fall.
That's not working.
Before
I bring in James for the next question, just wanted to bring to your attention the Coalition of Resistance website. I know we have people in here today from across the country, and please do get involved in your local anti-cuts campaign if there is one, and if there isn't one, do set up some form of Coalition Resistance meetings and whatever. Coalition Resistance can give you help with speakers and that sort of thing. And on the website there is an affiliation motion which you can pass in your trade union branch, in your anti-cuts branch, in your students' union branch, or anything. You can affiliate to the Coalition of Resistance and get involved through that. So I'd like to bring up James for the next question, which is related, talking about demos.
Hello.
Yeah, James.
My question is about the media and how we deal with it, because obviously if we were to get to a revolutionary state, it would mean that we had to have a massive amount of support nationally or in other countries. The problem is the media doesn't focus on protests unless they're aggressive to the point of essentially having something on fire. But if we do get to that point, then they deride us and say that we're insane and we shouldn't be listened to because we put stuff on fire. So how do we deal with the fact that if we're not aggressive in our protests, the media doesn't listen, and if we are aggressive in our protests, the media essentially disrails what we're trying to say?
That's a good question. Thank you. The students did feel that last year, yes. Who would like to go first on this question? And we're also going to throw this out to the audience as well after the panel have spoken. So I'm going to ask Chris first.
Well, first I think we have to say that despite the media, things happen. Because if we had to wait for the media to get us out into the streets, we'd be waiting until hell froze over. And actually what we've seen is that people will take to the streets in numbers despite the media and fight back despite the media. Right? When that then happens, the media has to respond, because it has to respond, it has to sell. Right? And if you look at it, actually, Occupy Wall Street and the occupation movements have had a lot of media coverage. Actually, disproportionate in some ways to the numbers involved. I'm not trying to dish the movements, but you know, compared to the anti-war demonstrations over Iraq invasion, it's small participation, right? But actually, I think that's largely because it's caught a public mood, right? And that has to be reflected in the media. And I always say, even the Sun has to sell papers. They put in a lot of study to see what their readers are thinking. One of the reasons why they supported Tony Blair wasn't just because he was a creep, right? It was because they looked at their readership figures and discovered the majority of the readers were going to vote Labour. Right? So they do have to pay a bit of attention for it. But I think there's also something else. There's also other forms of media coming out. You know, some of us here get to appear in things like Russia Today, Press TV. I'm amazed at how many people in Britain are now watching this. This is one reason I think they're actually trying to get Ofcom are trying to get Press TV off the Sky platform. Because during the student protests, people actually discovered that they were getting a better coverage from Press TV or Russia Today or Al Jazeera than they were from the BBC and all the rest of it. So there are forms of getting our own protest. And I just want to say one final thing. I think one of the things that St Paul's occupation has done is shown that good old-fashioned forms of communication are a great way of doing it. And the fact that you're having rallies and discussions on the steps of St Paul's is wonderful. And I think hats off to the Occupy London movement here. What it's done in the whole occupation movement, it's taken a public debate and erupted it into British and global society. The debate they didn't want to have, because what they were telling us is there's no alternative, is there? It's just austerity of the free market, right? And you haven't got an economics degree, and you're stupid, and you can't participate. And suddenly we're discovering there is a debate, and it's taking place. It's taking place not just in St Paul's, but it's impacting to every household, every community, everything there. And really, it's a brilliant thing, I think, that has happened, and they're to be congratulated in achieving that.
Yeah, just a quick thing, 2 points to reiterate some of that. I mean, I think we have to organise our own media as well, and I think we have been doing that. I mean, you know, it is very effective. I mean, just even the whole thing about Ian Tomlinson, the video, and the fact that wasn't, you know, that actually had a huge impact. on providing evidence of the opposite of what the media is trying to sell us. And the other thing is, I fully agree. I mean, in terms of old-fashioned ways of communicating as well. I mean, to get ideas out there, we have to have meetings in our local places where we work and live, and in university settings. I mean, I think we have to get ideas out there to sort of counter the ideas that are being fed to us, by the mass media. I think it's both. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just be very quick.
It keeps on doing it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. No, I'll be very quick. I agree. I think it's not definitely the case that demos are always unreported if there's no violence, that people have said,
That sounds working.
Okay. But I think a lot of the time when violence does erupt, it's often because it's the acts of people that don't have a lot left. You see over the last couple of years, what was Millbank, which was students who are going to be faced with crippling debt, and looking at a life of kind of joblessness now as well, and the riots over the summer. These are people that had nothing left. And I think often media focus on violence and on how many police officers were injured, or how many people were injured. It can be a way for media to try and avoid discussing the social issues that actually motivate those kind of acts in the first place. But obviously I think that's backfired incredibly, because the student movement clearly gave a lot of inspiration to wide anti-cuts movements, to the trade unions, as well, and then they've actually used it as an excuse, well, not an excuse, a reason, to talk about those broader social issues, which is fantastic. So thank you.
Final one from Alex, and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor.
Agree with the previous three speakers. Just to add on the supports thing, I think they have got a lot of media attention. One, I think because it's been quite imaginative, and as Chris said, they've been very outward looking. It's an occupation that is very outward looking. But the second reason I think is that the media think no one else is saying anything. I think Polly Toynbee made this point in her article last week in The Guardian, that these people are putting the Labour Party to shame, because the Labour Party should be maybe not occupying, you wouldn't expect the Labour Party to occupy St Paul's, but the Labour Party should be raising these questions about the crisis and attacking the government much more. And Polly Toynbee was down there, I think, wasn't she, debating them, in front of 200 people. So it has captured people's attention. I think we'll continue to do so. The other thing I wanted to say, because I was asked to say it, and this is perhaps the time to shamelessly plug the demonstration in London that we can now confirm will be happening in central London, which again, I can't promise you bonfires, and I don't want bonfires on the day, but what I can promise you, and what I hope you can contribute to, is putting thousands of people on the streets in central London, and there will be demonstrations all over the country, but we know the one in London will get considerable media attention, and there are some people who are a little bit afraid of that, so we do want to build that. It's 12 o'clock, assemble at Lincoln's Inn Fields for a march to a rally near the Houses of Parliament just by Westminster Bridge. So it's a good route, it's a good end-up location, so we hope people will support that, and I'm confident it will get lots of media attention.
Thank you. Matthias.
Matthias Simetakis.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say that first, it's not working. Well, anyway, I think it's let's not overestimate the power of the media. I mean, we all live in the same society, so I mean, people don't always buy what the media are selling, and as contradictions become wider and wider, they find it even harder to sell this. The media are a propaganda machine. They're part of the establishment. They act as such. So we also have to understand and evaluate the crisis the media are going through at the moment. They're going to continue going through a crisis. That's one thing. The other thing is that we definitely need to use horizontal forms of communication, and the internet provides that ability. And we need to make that stronger and stronger. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Say your name as well, if that's okay. I just put it right next to your mouth.
Yeah, I'm Dan from Counterforum. I think, like Chris said, there are ways of exploiting existing media, but I think I want to focus mainly on building our media. And a part of that, I mean, that is what Counterfire, that's why we set up a website. I mean, and it's an age-old sort of problem for how to compete with ruling class ideas and ideas that are propagated by the establishment. I mean, you know, in Lenin's time they did it with newspapers because that was the most sort of cheapest form of mass communication you could possibly do then. But actually now with the internet, it's possible to actually build alternative medias that are a great resource as well. But I mean, it's something that needs to be built. You do actually need to build an infrastructure. I mean, and I think it's actually filming meetings like this and filming demonstrations. That didn't happen so much about a year ago. There weren't. I'm going to blow our own trumpet. We started filming these things because it seemed logical. We started putting them on the website because that seemed logical, and now everyone else does it. I mean, and I think you can build by making decisions. You can actually build alternative forms of media very quickly. I mean, I just, as much as the Tory Louise Mensch is her name, who criticised Starbucks drinking smartphone using activists. I mean, we can, you know, it doesn't really matter if we can use it to our advantage. I mean, I just uploading a couple of 30-second videos from a mobile phone. I got like 5,000 hits in 2 days. So I think you can do. It's obvious you can get messages out there, but I think really that does involve organisation. I think that's, you know, part of why we've been getting people, asking people to join us, is because if we had a bit more income, we could actually set up live feeds, we could actually make little TV shows, we could actually get viral videos and campaigns out as well, as part of also being involved on the streets as well. So I would use this as a cheeky way of appealing people to join, and also do get involved, do try and write stuff, send stuff to the site, content at counterforum.org, send in your videos, send in your pictures, because that is a good forum for building and reaching out to more people beyond the mainstream media.
Thank you, Dan. That leads right into my next point, actually, because we don't sell newspapers, but what we do have is a fantastic free broadsheet, which we have. The new one has arrived today with lots of things about the occupation and an interview with Lindsay German. Please do pick up a box of these to take back to your local area, and we can distribute them like metro style wherever you go. So please do take those with you. The next question I'm now going to actually throw out to the floor. It's from Fran Legg. Fran, would you like to read it out, or would you like me to? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I was just wanting to ask the panel and you guys, I guess, how can we account for the rise of the Europe-wide rise of Islamophobia, and can it be seen as just a direct consequence of austerity measures and the economic crisis, or should we be looking at other factors as well, like the war on terror, for example? And also, a second part to that, how best can we as the left be challenging Islamophobia, especially when some sections of the left have been very bad on the issue, particularly in France?
Hannah, would you like to come to the front, because we have a microphone, or are you going to shout from the back? Can you stand up and shout?
Just really quickly to touch on what you said there, I think in society, when you're looking to blame someone for something that is very real, something that is happening to you, whether it's you losing your job, whether it's your child not getting into a good school, your mother not getting the health care that's good enough, etc. You won't generally look around in your workplace or in your community for someone to blame. You're going to try and find someone that you don't see to blame. And I think what is really, really real here in the UK is that ethnic minorities, Muslims, particularly people from Bangladeshi or Southeast Asian backgrounds, are disenfranchised. They are removed from society, placed in estates that are separate from society. They are, if they do work, they work in workplaces that are separate from society, and most of the time they are unemployed. And so they're completely disenfranchised and removed and isolated from society at large, so that when austerity hits and when issues hit and when there are problems and when there is terror and when there are wars, and you look around you want to find someone, and you don't look around you and you want to find someone to blame, you also always blame those who aren't visible around you. And I think London is a very diverse, it's a very multicultural city, although it does have its segregations and we all know of them. But if you move farther out, it seems that it becomes more so the case that the very people who are being blamed for this crisis or for various other issues and crises are the very people that the majority of people in this country don't see on a daily basis. And so what we should be saying back is unemployment and inflation are not caused by immigration. Thank you.
Chris,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. Islamophobia, like all other forms of racism, are largely used by the establishment, the ruling classes, to try and get people to blame each other, really, other sections of the population, ordinary people, for the problems that are actually caused by the establishment in the first place, in this case, the cuts. But I think there's two other things that are important about Islamophobia. One is that, because at any time there's always racism under capitalism, but it takes specific forms. And I do think that Islamophobia as well is linked to the what's happened since 9/11, is linked to the wars that Bush and the Western powers have been have launched, and is in a way partly a form of war propaganda. It's an attempt, because you look at the way Muslims are vilified and demonised. It's about terrorism. It's about not wanting to integrate, but also about being potentially dangerous. And so, I think we have to see that link as well. It's very, very important that we do. And therefore, the campaign against Islamophobia is also about continuing the campaign against the wars, which, by the way, a lot of the rest of the left isn't very good about either. And I think that now that Iran appears to be incredibly in the kind of crosshairs of the Western powers, one of the things we'll see is a ramping up of the kind of frenzied stereotypes of Muslims and, Ahmadinejad this and so on and so forth, which will accompany that, and that's something that we've got to counter. The last thing is, the other thing about Islamophobia, and the other reason why it's convenient and why it's being ramped up, is because it's a kind of racism that pretends not to be a racism, because it pretends to be about religion. And so one of the other things we have to do is to say, actually, this isn't about religion at all. This isn't an enlightenment campaign against backward ideas. It's not rocket science. The fact of the matter is, the vast majority of Muslims in Britain and elsewhere actually have dark skins, and this is a kind of almost a disguise, a camouflage form of racism that we have to expose.
John.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting, complex question, and I just want to repeat something that Lee Jasper from Barak said at the big rally that we had at the time of the riots, and he made a joke. He said, I'd like to thank the Muslim community for holding open the position of scapegoat in British society, so that as soon as the riots started, the Afro-Caribbean community could come back and take that place. And that's it's an important point, because actually the event that's been most intimately connected with poverty and deprivation and the economic crisis wasn't targeted at the Muslim community. It was targeted by the government at the Afro-Caribbean community because of the role that they played in the riots themselves. You could also say actually that lots of Roma are under attack in this register as well. So at the economic register, I would say it's not mainly focused on the Muslim community, it's mainly focused on other communities. But the specific thing about Islamophobia and why it's such a pernicious thing is it is driven by a central project of the imperialist powers in our age. That's what, it's not actually even a divide and rule question primarily. It's an ideology of war. It is primarily an ideology of war, and it is driven by the war on terror, and as Chris says, if the Iranian thing comes back, get ready for the next wave of Islamophobia. That is exactly how it will be portrayed, and it's very important that we have it in our mind like this, because other forms of racism are driven by kind of the far right of the Tory party. They're driven by groups like the BNP and so on and so forth. Historically, I mean, the National Front and so forth. The thing about Islamophobia is because it's an ideology of war, because it's central to the state machine, it's driven from the top by the state machine. When Enoch Powell made the Rivers of Blood speech, he was sacked by Ted Heath. He was in the cabinet and he was sacked by Ted Heath. David Cameron makes the speeches about Islamophobia, and nobody is sacked for agreeing with him. It's central to them, it's not marginal to them, it's not a deniable operation, it's not just street politics, it's something driven right from the heart of Langley, Virginia, from the White House, from Downing Street, and that's why it's absolutely central for us to take it up as an issue.
Before I bring in Alex, who wants to speak on this topic, I'm putting a call out there for a final question or contribution, perhaps turning the discussion to another topic. We've all agreed quite a bit so far, so if there's anybody that doesn't agree or would like to take it from a different angle, then please do that as well. So let me bring in Alex and then Marius from Bristol.
Is that all? Yeah. I'd indicated I wanted to speak before John did, and actually John said pretty much everything I was going to say. That I think what we will see in this period now, on the back of the cuts, is a growth in racism targeted at different communities. We saw it with Dale Farm. The traveller community, we shouldn't forget, are being attacked and scapegoated as well. Just one thing on that. One sort of byproduct of the the clearing of Dale Farm was that the school that those children go to is now facing closure because they're all going to be dispersed. But the interesting thing about it is that the school has only got mainly traveller children in it because the local people took their kids away from them once the traveller children started going from it. See, you can see how deep this, this is embedded in our society. But I think John's absolutely right. The thing I want to say is that Islamophobia is different and preceded the cuts agenda and supersedes it all really. And we have to have a separate understanding of what's going on. And I think what you saw in Libya, I think what you saw with the imperialist intervention in Libya is intended to send a message to the whole of that region that they haven't gone away, that they stand by, ready to intervene anywhere and at any time they want. So we do have to have, I think, a very clear and separate understanding of what Islamophobia is and what's driving it, whilst at the same time recognising that there will be a growth in racism targeted at different communities in the coming period that we also have to respond to.
Marius from Bristol.
I've got to tread carefully with what I'm going to say now, but I think there are, in the Islamic religion, but also in many other religions, particularly the biggest ones, there are actually also a few negative tendencies as a sexist or and so on, and I think that there's a danger with seeing everything with these, everyone's racist and they're being made as scapegoats and stuff like that. You have to also have a critical view of some of the things that come from Islam, not because of the religion. It's I'm getting muddled up now. Does everyone get where I'm coming from?
We're getting yes. I'm going to take somebody that hasn't spoken already. There was the guy there with the white shirt that just popped his hand up quickly. Yes, you. Did you not put your hand up? Were you just stretching? Yes. Yes. Okay. Fran. Was it? No. Well, why am I?
I was going to say,
okay,
when I was speaking, I was going to say, what we shouldn't allow the people who are Islamophobic, like David Cameron, to do, is pretend that they've got righteous indignation or, about some of the, some of the difficulties we have with some of the tendencies within Islam. You're absolutely right. But look at what happens here. Look at what happens in any society. The sexism, the racism, the prejudice that goes on here. Look at the rise in raunch culture that we have in this country. We're no great saints in this country to be telling people how they should, how they should organise in their own country. But you're absolutely right. We don't see the Muslim community as homogeneous. I think David Cameron and his ilk do, but we don't give them any cover when they pretend that the invasion of Afghanistan was about liberating women and anything like that. It was nothing to do with that. So I think we have to be clear about it, and I think we do have to acknowledge what you're saying.
The guy there, what's your name?
I've not been associated with this forum, but no, that's fine. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
No? Okay, cool. It's more to maybe Josh, who did the Occupy LSX. Just wondering what are the thoughts here, and what are we looking to achieve after Occupy LSX, and how?
Okay. Excellent question. Josh is kettled in Parliament, but I did try to call him, but he's not picking up, so presumably he's pushing off the police. But I do think other people could answer that question actually. I know somebody wanted to come back on Marius's question. Was that Charlie? Bob, sorry. Sorry.
One other aspect of this Islamophobia is historically it's been a tool of British imperialism, and if you read what Churchill wrote from the Sudan in the 1890s, it's almost the same rhetoric, and you shouldn't forget that. But also that British imperialism will use Islam when it can to undermine national liberation movements if it can create a split. So we're dealing with imperialism here and its aspects, and we mustn't forget that.
I'm going to bring Ellie in on this question.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back briefly on the kind of sexism in religion question. Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lindsay mentioned earlier in the session on sexism, anyway, that religions often kind of holds up a mirror to society. So, you know, if there is sexism within a religion, it's not necessarily because that religion is inherently sexist, however, it's because it's reflecting a society which is very much sexist in nature as well. I do think within a lot of religions, actually, you know, there are women that are actively fighting that sexism too. And I mean, this is a huge problem with the kind of interventionist mantra, because actually it destroys, you know, movements in countries, you know, where women's rights, you know, perhaps are not fantastic, but women have been fighting for that kind of liberation actually for years and decades, and these movements, you know, these kind of invasions and this justification of women's rights and fighting sexism actually destroys all the hard work people are doing within their own communities, within their own countries, to challenge that that kind of sexism on that level. So, yeah, absolutely, I do see where you're coming from. I think it is very much a case of challenging sexism right across the board and supporting people when they're organising within their own communities to challenge those kind of things, as opposed to perhaps as an outsider, you know, making those comments when actually the whole of society is incredibly sexist and structured in that way.
I'm going to take Richard and then Chris on this question. Then I want to sort of sum up the evening, the session, with a response to the question about the occupations and resistance in general, if people start thinking about what they want to say on that particular topic. So, Richard Allday.
So, I don't want to hammer the point home because it has been made, but the reality is you cannot get ordinary working class kids to go out and kill other human beings and justify that to their parents and neighbours unless you first of all get clear in people's heads that the people that are being killed are separate from, different from us. Somehow they don't share the same humanity. And this is not an abstract theoretical question that is just about Islamophobia. Because I remember the treatment that was dished out to Irish people in this country when Irish people were fighting for their right to run their own country separate from the British Crown. If you go to America and you ask Koreans or Cambodians or Laotians how they were treated at the time that the American state was involved in the war in Vietnam, you will find exactly the same process. If you ask Mexican Americans about the history of their grandfathers and their grandmothers, their experience at the time when the United States was conducting the wars in the Philippines and in the war against Mexico, you will find the same thing. So I think that John and Chris are absolutely right. Islamophobia is not racism on the level that is just divide and rule. It's absolutely essential for them to con us that Muslims are the other if we're going to carry on bombing their cities, blowing their arms and legs off and killing their kids. And because of that, we've got a responsibility to dissociate ourselves from what our rulers are doing in our name. And the second thing is we don't mix that up with our attitude to religion. And I know what the Catholic Church's record is in child abuse. But I wouldn't dream of starting giving grief to my next door neighbour because she goes to church on a Sunday. You know, we oppose racism, we oppose sexism, we oppose all kinds of reactionary ideas, whether the person that's coming out of them is a tosspot like Dawkins, who's got no belief in God, or whether the person has some claim to some religious belief. The two should not get mixed up.
Sanam very cleverly started up a Twitter hashtag which went absolutely viral, and I'm not sure whether that's what she's going to be talking about, but it was a brilliant case of resistance. And
right, I don't see why Islamophobia and all this. Islam, it's been around for. Can everyone hear me well?
Yeah.
Islam That's been around for over 1400 years, when the Prophet was around 1400 years. No one had a problem with it then. No one had a problem with it 100 years ago. It's just now. It's the Irish, as you were saying, black people was just scapegoating, literally. And all this stuff about, like Richard so brilliantly put, we don't blame Christians for the crimes of the KKK. We don't blame them for colonialism. So why are you blaming a whole religion for the crimes of 19 hijackers? It makes no sense. In regards to sexism, if you open the Quran, which many of the EDL, the BNP, David Cameron probably hasn't even done, there's a whole chapter called An-Nisa, and that means the woman. So they talk about sexism, but there's no chapter on the man. Are you going to say, oh, Islam, it's sexist to men now? So yeah, okay, that didn't right. And yeah, also lack of knowledge. David Cameron's got he can't say anything about Islam when MPs are fiddling expenses all the time. If you look in history, in Islam, the caliphs, who were the rulers at the time, they literally had no money themselves. There was an incident where a woman she was going to the house of the caliph, and his wife opened the door, and she saw like a man with tatty clothes, and she said to him, why are you dressed like that in front of him? And she didn't realise this was the caliph, he was the ruler, and himself, he only used to have one shirt, or he'd only have one shirt. He'd have another caliph, he had two shirts. When one was in the wash, he'd be wearing another one, or there's a time when he only had one, and he'd stay at home and wouldn't go out because he didn't have any clothes to wear. So David Cameron, you have no morals at all when your MPs filling expenses for thousands and thousands of pounds. So shut up, David Cameron. In regards to liberating women, if liberating women is about bombing the shit out of Afghanistan, trust me, we don't want liberation. Women, not just Muslim women, women in whole. In regards to clothing, when you wear too little, like in Canada, the police officers start saying it's your fault you're getting raped because you wear too little. And then when Muslims are wearing burqas, when they're wearing jilbabs, you've got a problem with that. So it's like, you wear too little, they've got a problem. You wear too much, they've got a problem. It makes no sense. And that's all I had, and that's my rant over. Bye.
I just want to come in an associated argument, which is about Iran. See, you can be against the regime in Iran, you can be against nuclear missiles, but you should be opposed to any attack in Iran. And the reason is quite simple. If Iran wasn't building a nuclear bomb after this week's headlines and reports, it should be building one now probably, because it knows what's coming. And also, then you've got to turn around and say, who are the people who are talking about attacking Iran? Yeah. The only power that's ever used atomic weapons, Israel, which had an illegal, secret program to build nuclear weapons, Britain, who supplied the plutonium for Israel to get those nuclear weapons, is currently replacing Trident missiles. These have got the ability to destroy the world 100 times over, right? And they are lecturing Iran about what it needs to be done. And then you've got to throw in what the Britain and America's record is in the region, in the country. It overthrew the 1953 government of Mossadegh, which dared to nationalise BP and Royal Shell in Iran. The CIA and MI5 had orchestrated a coup which installed the Shah of Iran, who is hated and still is hated by the vast majority of Iranians, despite their opinions of Ahmadinejad. And that was remembered, and the support they gave the Shah of Iran. And believe you me, whatever Iranians think about Ahmadinejad, Iranian nationalism is a real factor here, and there will be more resistance to any attack in Iran than there was an attack in Iraq. It's a different kettle of fish, and actually I'm scared, and people should be scared of talking of attacking Iran. It is a desperate throw of the dice by these people, and we should oppose it. Whatever our opinions are about Ahmadinejad, whatever our opinions are of nuclear weapons, we should not in any way make any support for this talk of attacking Iran.
Thank you very much on that topic. I'm now going to ask to sum up, or for people to answer the question about the occupation movement, where it's going, what is it achieving, and whatever else you want to contribute to that. So I'll take that from the floor to start with, and then the speakers, the panel.
It's not going anywhere, it's kettled.
Neil Faulkner, please. St Albans and Time Team.
Every time. Look, I want to say this really about the Occupy London movement. I mean, what is extraordinary about it is the way in which it has exposed the ideological weakness of the ruling class. Because if 200 people camping outside St Paul's can create a crisis for them on this scale, split the Anglican Church, create a complete media circus, have it as the something that is being talked about all over Britain by millions of people for whatever it is, 3 weeks. It exposes their ideological weakness. But I tell you what our problem is, and this is answering the question really about where we go. On our side, we have a problem of organisational weakness. We may be winning the arguments about the system, about the banks, about bonuses, about the crisis, but we are not creating the organisations that we need to turn that huge body of sympathy which there is out there for some kind of alternative into an effective mass movement. So if you're serious about answering the question, where do we go from Occupy London, you have to think about what organisations you belong to and what organisations you are trying to build. So I make no apology for making a contribution towards the end of the day, which is actually about people joining. And there are people here who are not members of Counterfire. There are people here who may think they're members of Counterfire, but they're not yet proper members because they're not yet paying a sub. And I tell you what, you can carry on watching history as the world burns, or you can become part of making it. Because the reality is, nothing ever happens spontaneously. Everything has to be organised. Everything has to be built. Every protest, every meeting. And if we are going to create a mass movement of millions that can bring down the Condemn coalition, that can overthrow the rule.
Thank you, Neil. More discussion around the occupations and the movements? Cool. Can you what?
Go sideways, Claire.
Go on. Quick one.
It's just something that somebody said earlier on about the media, and it's just purely and simply something that's going to be in the news probably on the front page tomorrow. It's a multiple accident on the M5 that happened last night, and the police apparently are still not releasing details of fatalities, which suggests that it must have been a pretty nasty multi-vehicle incident involving a number of heavy goods vehicles. And I just want people to be aware, if the press start pointing the finger at drivers acting irresponsibly, bullying lorry drivers or anything, just bear this in mind, because the press won't tell you that some of those drivers will have been driving home at the end of a working week. They will have been working for more than 70 hours legally, because that is the limit of drivers' hours, 75 hours a week, Monday to Friday. They could well have driven 300 or 400 miles. They will be under pressure from their governors to get the job done, and from their families to at least see them for 1 or 1.5 days of a weekend. So please, whatever the horror stories are and the human tragedies that come out tomorrow, think that it is part of the nonsense system we live under, that goods are transported on motorways instead of by rail, polluting the atmosphere, destroying people's lives in a normal working week, and now horribly it looks as if they may have destroyed dozens of people's lives in terms of their loved ones.
Richard didn't say this, but Richard is also a truck driver, and he's just set up a blog called The Angry Trucker, so please do follow that. I'm now going to bring in the panel to sum up, and then we're all going to go for a lemonade or whatever, something to eat around the corner. I'm gonna ask for suggestions as to where people think we should go, because I was going to suggest the old Crown on New Oxford Street, but if people have better suggestions, please do let me know before the panel has summed up. So I'm going to start with...
We don't have to answer that question.
We can have a consensus-based decision-making on that one if we like. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our speakers in advance anyway, and I'd like to ask Alex to start off the final... Oh, you've got your own
Really pleased to have been here for this session. I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the whole day, but I think it's been a good way of organising the discussion, and I think the question that you raised about Islamophobia provoked a really good discussion. I think the responses to that have been fantastic. I think what I just want to finish off by saying is these are very, very scary times that we're living in, and I think, you know, we're looking forward to our strike on November the 30th, but I think a lot of people, I think you have to understand, a lot of people will be nervous about taking strike action, and I think that nervousness will grow when you see all the news coming from the G20, coming from Greece. I think people will feel, and they will feel under attack about whether they should be doing anything. You've already got loads of commentators on the media now saying we have to get used to the idea that we're going to have to work longer, that we can't have the things that we used to buy, that we're going to have to get used to living with less, living all that kind of thing, and that will drip into it. So it is quite scary, but it's also quite exciting times. If you think back to only a year ago that the students sparked a movement into being in a way, that we had March the 26th, you've got the Occupy Wall Street, so there is real potential. I think Neil's right to say what we haven't got is, and what is desperately needed, is real unity on the left in coming together in the anti-cuts campaigns, you know, through the movement, so that we are able to credibly put an alternative, because I think that's what we are going to need to have to do. We are going to need to be saying, what is our alternative, what are our solutions to the crisis. But if you think back to what's happened in the last 6 months, the church was the last set of the establishment to face its crisis, because, you know, previous to that you had the police, you had News of the World, you know, the Murdoch Empire and Parliament, all embroiled in the most sleazy, disgusting, you know, charade, you know, what was going on, all facing that crisis. And now the church, you know, split down the aisle, as I heard someone say, you know, about how it should respond to the crisis. So there are fundamental questions being posed to all wings of the establishment, but at the same time there are fundamental questions being posed to us about how we go forward. I don't know what pub we're going to go to, but I hope to see you on November 30th, because that's the next part of it. Thank you very much.
The other headline that grabbed attention was Vickers in a twist, I believe. Ellie, thank you.
So one thing I just want to say briefly, just in relation to this ongoing discussion that we were having about Islamophobia, because Shannon reminded me of something I forgot to say earlier, I think is really interesting, and then I'll sum up more generally. But actually, in an interview with some members of the Revolutionary Association of Women in Afghanistan, a lot of these women said that, funnily enough, the best way to organise, you know, in countries like Afghanistan, is from under a burqa, because, you know what, under a burqa you can keep a massive stack of leaflets, you can actually keep a camera to record police injustices, and yeah, absolutely, and get this kind of stuff out on the internet, and actually, you know, build a movement in that way. And you know, I just think that is really telling, that people just, you know, our government especially just doesn't get that and thinks, oh my goodness, these women are covered from head to foot, like, that must be the most oppressive thing in the world, when actually these are some of the most kind of forward-thinking, progressive women in the country who are using that as a way to organise against injustice. So I just thought that was something really interesting that I kind of wanted to mention. And I think this session has been really, really interesting. I think the breadth of stuff that we've covered is amazing. You know, we've discussed riots, we've discussed cuts, people, you know, starving and dying because of the poverty that's happening. You know, not to mention kind of worldwide climate change and extreme racism and war. And, you know, I guess something like that might suggest that we could take quite a bleak outlook, but I think actually we have to look at that and take precisely the opposite, because for every single issue that we've discussed here today, every single one of those issues has actually been met with a huge movement of resistance. I don't think there's any single issue that we've talked about that hasn't had mass protests opposing it, and it hasn't kind of brought people together against those injustices. And I think that is something that should, you know, fill every single person in here with hope that we can actually make a better world in that sense. And I do want to echo Neil's point that, you know, if you do like what you've heard today, if you were inspired by that mass resistance, and if you think that the right way forward is to try and unite those movements and push forward and build a better society, I do think you should join Counterforum, and I hope that you will. And yeah, I echo Alex, I hope to see you all at the pub and on November 30th.
You know, whether it's kind of developing an alternative form of media, or organising an occupation, or what kind of a position should we take on Libya or Islamophobia, or how do we engage with the Occupy movement, to have an organisation to be able to go back to discuss ideas, to debate ideas, to have a platform to write articles or read articles, or you know, to discuss things with, you have to have an organisation. And it's not just about ideas, that's important as well, but also the practical aspects of organizing things. You can't do that without an organization. So I absolutely agree with Alex when he says we have to have unity on the left, but we also have to be clear politically and you know, to decide on what basis do we forge that unity, and we can only be clear politically if we have an organization. So I think it's absolutely crucial. It's not just an abstract question, you know, to whether I should join or not. If we want to be part of fighting the cuts and to changing the world, we have to be part of an organization.
I want to talk about the left, because I said what I thought the greatest achievement of the Occupy movement was. And I want to say that resistance to austerity is going to happen without the left. It will happen anyway. It is happening in Spain with the indignant movement without the left. It can be hijacked, actually. In Italy, in Rome, we saw a demonstration that was hijacked. Unfortunately, you know, a group called the Black Bloc, and a demonstration of 200,000, essentially took control of the demonstration and did something very destructive with it, which went against where it was going. And people, I think, who want to create a paramilitary organisation in Italy shouldn't choose black as the colour they want to have, in no sense of history here. But resistance is going to happen, right? And therefore, we have to talk about the left, because I think the state of the left is something we should be honest about. It's fairly dire. In Scotland, there could have been one MSP elected at the last election, Scottish election, if the left had had one united list standing in the elections. Now, this is the worst possible election, actually, for the left. We would have still got an MSP. Instead, there were 3 separate lists, 4 in Glasgow. Right? It's a ludicrous situation. And we are arguing for unity, and it's interesting that the debacle which destroyed the Scottish Socialist Party, there's now a young generation of people who are coming forward and saying we've got to have unity, and are clashing with the older people still immersed in those sectarian conflicts. And I think we can win out in Scotland. I have to say, people from Glasgow, Scotland come down to London, we look at the left, and with honourable exceptions of people here, and we sometimes wonder, I was on the demonstration against the rally against the Afghan war, I sometimes wonder if the left in England are trying to construct a imaginal line of paste tables and gazebos between them and the movement. Because that's what it looks like. They look like a group of people who are physically trying to separate themselves off from the movement. They're on the sidelines. It reminds me of someone on the Spanish left who said the banned political parties from the camp in the Central America. So I asked, what are you doing? He said, oh, we've set up a paste table beyond the camp. You know, I mean, I said, oh, you know, my goodness, throw away the paste table, throw away your papers and go into it. And then find a way of operating. And I think we've got to turn around and say, and the strength of the discussion today is that primarily build an organisation, but an organisation that's part of the movement, which doesn't separate itself off. You know, we have to say the comrades here were the only people on the left in England to build a decent response to the riots in August with the core meetings and the core rallies. The rest of the left, it was treated as a way of selling more papers and getting more contacts, to be perfectly honest. And this is not good enough. This is not politics. And I want to mention someone who's deeply unfashionable to end on, which is Lenin. Because Lenin stressed what is the tactical concern, the primary tactical issue for the left in Western Europe is the construction of a united front and the united front strategy. But he tied that in, if you read Left-Wing Communism, which is a polemic, bad title in some ways, but it's polemic in favour of united front politics, but also a polemic for a party which is an interventionist party which could carry out that united front strategy. And that's what we're trying to build. We don't want to build a sect which is just simply standing over there. We don't just want to build something that judges things through membership and newspaper sales, important as they can be. We want to build an organisation which is interventionist and gets results. And that to me has been the message of today's discussion. I think that's a common discussion for both the organisations this side of the border. And I have to say this, we'll be having a conference on the 19th of November, and one of the things we will be raising is that we should be moving towards the two organisations, the other forces, trying to construct at a UK level a federation of radical forces in the United Kingdom. You know, we'll keep our independence because we're pro-independence for all sorts of reasons I'm trying to discuss. But you know, we should be working together as a federation against the UK capitalist state because we want to break it. That's one of the reasons I'm pro-independence. Actually, if it comes to a referendum, I'll vote yes because I'll break the United Kingdom by any means necessary. Given its current and historic record around the globe, the UK's got to go.
Well, just before you all stand up, I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you to the panel for this final session. I hope you enjoyed us experimenting with a different format. We also do welcome your feedback from today, from the whole day. It has been a fantastic day. So please do send in your thoughts, or please do suggest other ways of doing things for the future, because as Counterfire, other people have asked you to join. What I'm going to ask you to do is to contribute as well. We want people sending in articles, suggestions, their reports on their events, videos, tweets, sharing it on Facebook, absolutely anything you can do to help build Counterfire. 70% of our hits on our website come through sharing articles on Facebook. So if all you do each morning, not all you do, obviously we want everybody to do lots more, but if you haven't got any other time, please do share the articles on Facebook, tweet them out, and try to reach out as what Lenin called, out to those networks of militant agents and get them involved in what we do. Now, obviously the day has also been very well shaped by you guys at 2, so thank you very much for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to put on anything like this in your area, you can do. You can do a question time, you can do a film show, let us know. We'll give you a hand if you need it. We look forward to seeing you all out at the pub and all out on November the 30th, as they say. So, oh, okay, we didn't decide on the pub, did we?